Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the pod. I'm Mike Schroeder. I'm joined by Maggie Robinson, former D1 soccer player at Penn, and also one of the co-hosts for the Mixed Doubles podcast, which I'll plug in the link to it at the end of this video in the description. But before we get into questions, I want to say, Maggie, thank you so much for hopping on today's podcast, and appreciate you making time.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited. Excited to chat.
Absolutely. So, for those who don't know you, kind of talk a little bit about, your background as a soccer player, maybe where you're from, and just kind of give an intro from that, and then we can kind of go how you went to Penn and stuff like that.
Totally. So we can back it up a little bit. I'm originally from Nashville, Tennessee, and born and raised there. Played soccer my whole life growing up. Like that was my main sport. Did a lot of sports in high school, but soccer was always the one I stuck with. And I was a goalkeeper. So I don't know, when I was little, I really hated running, like aggressively hated running. And so they stuck me in goal and I was like, this is perfect. I don't have to move until the ball comes to me. So I just kind of stuck with that, played on a big club team, and then got recruited to go to college at Penn, which was a fantastic opportunity because I'd always kind of been of the mindset I want to use my soccer career to advance me academically and like use it to my advantage to get into these really good schools versus going to a big SEC, ACC school. And it really just all kind of laid out in front of me when I got to Penn. So I played soccer there for 3 years, during which the COVID pandemic kind of was crazy, as you know, and like messed things up. So I played for three, got injured. I tore a ligament in my hand, so I couldn't really catch the ball, which is pretty integral to being a goalkeeper. So I stopped playing, and that was what got me into career thoughts of like, okay, now I'm not doing soccer. Like, what do I actually want to spend all this free time on? Because I don't know if the listeners know, but being a D1 athlete is literally like a full-time job on top of being a student at an Ivy League institution. So I was like hands full, very busy. And then all of a sudden had like 30 hours of free time a week. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do with myself? Um, and so I just like realized I was still super into sports. Um, yeah, and then went from there, but we can get into that more. But that's a little bit of my background and where I come from.
Can you talk about the challenges then, kind of sticking to athletics, of just trying to balance the education and the grind of sports? I mean, like I went to Amherst College, as you well know, and
Yeah.
I'm at Columbia now, but like I even at a D3 level, it was tough to do. But even when you have
Mhm.
more responsibility at an Ivy League school, can you talk a little bit about like how you were still able to manage both, and like what did you do to be able to manage your time effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you get the grind. It is so real. And from the outside, it's really easy for people to be like, oh, you guys have it all together. Like you go to practice and then you go to class. And it's like, yeah, but there's so much that goes on. So a lot of it was like I developed really good time management skills of being like, okay, I have this paper coming up. I know I need to do these things. While I'm on the bus driving to Dartmouth, I need to grind out this comms paper. Otherwise, it's not going to get done because we have a full game on Sunday. Um, and I got really good at like organizing my time. I would have like three different planners and like just like really make sure I was like blocking out my time because I also had three jobs on campus while I was at Penn. So I was like juggling a lot. Really wanted to try to I loved my athletic people and my bubble I'd built, but I really wanted to experience Penn for all that it was. And so I was trying to dip my toes into other aspects. So yeah, I would say I just got really good at time management. Which has helped me a lot in my career, but it was definitely, I look back and I'm like, I don't know how the hell I did that.
So you said you were doing three jobs on campus. Is it just because you like to be busy and that's why you decided to drown yourself in a lot of work? Or was it because I'm saying like some people would be like, that's crazy, but
Yeah.
like why did you decide to go that path? Because I mean, that
Yeah.
does sound like that would be a lot of, you know, things to be able to juggle. But it seemed like you were able to make it work. So can you talk about
Yeah.
why you decided to do that?
Totally. So candidly, I it was like a work study student at Penn. So I would get paid through these on-campus jobs as a way to like support like academic scholarship. And so I worked as a TA 1 year. I worked all 4 years with our community service athletics like partnership with West Philadelphia students, which I loved. And then I did a lot of work for Penn Athletics on their marketing communications team, working with their broadcasters. Um, yeah, so it was kind of a way to like find my passions outside of soccer, which I think was so huge. Because I'm sure, as you know, as an athlete, like it's really easy to get stuck in this one track mindset of like, it's my sport and it's school. And I feel really unfulfilled as like an actual human because I'm only doing those things. And so I think I use these jobs to be like, okay, but like, no, Maggie actually does have something else to offer. And like, I do have other passions and I am valued in these other circles that I didn't feel like I had if I hadn't done those jobs.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about your shift because you started doing a lot of stuff media wise at Penn,
Mhm.
and obviously some really good stuff which I'll clip in into this pod. But can you talk a little bit about where the passion for athlete storytelling at Penn came from? Because that's something that you really did a lot of and
Yeah.
became pretty quite good at it. Can you talk a little bit about just like why you decided to go that route and why you felt like that was where you needed to be at that stage in your kind of professional development?
Yeah. So for a little bit of background, I was a comms major and a journalism minor. So I was always really, my skill set was like writing and storytelling, like point blank always was when I was thinking about it. I'm not a data, I'm not a math girly, I'm not a science. Like that's just, I know my strengths and those are so not it. So I think I just taken a lot of classes in that and I was like, I really like this. And I really like telling people stories from like a general perspective, which is why I was in journalism as a minor. Um, and then once I stopped playing, I was like, oh, I really think it's interesting to focus on the players behind, like the people behind these players. Because so often athletes are just thrown into this bucket of like, you're a jock and this is the one thing you have. And like, I don't really care. Like, keep your mouth shut, play the game. When in reality, they're really complex people like anybody else. So I think once I leaned into the fact that I want to pursue sports as a career, I kind of married that with, oh, and this is what I'm studying. How do I put these two together? And I think coming from an athletic background, really just the passion of playing just translated over into this because I was like, oh, I loved playing, but I'm also equally as passionate about this. And I think like this is one of my biggest hills that I'll die on. It's like having passion for what you're doing will get you so far, even if you lack the skills at the beginning. So I think that's kind of what helped me to get here. And I can talk about the fast break if that's where we want to go with this.
Yeah, I mean, how about we shift over to that? Let's talk about the fast break then. So kind of just talk a little bit about that and um the importance of that for you.
Yeah. So the fast break was a sports video series that I created in partnership with Penn Athletics my junior year. And it was shown on ESPN Plus during all of our like Ivy games. It was shown on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube. And it was pretty much where I would work with a video director from Penn Athletics and I would pitch and create and like direct these series where I would get to try different sports. So like I tried on the pads for Penn football and was like a quarterback and wide receiver, which is hysterical. I tried diving and swimming with the swim and dive team, went off the high dive, terrifying experience. I tried fencing. Like it was just an opportunity for me to interview student athletes at Penn who don't always get the limelight, given that we're like a smaller mid-major school, if you want to look at it athletically. And then also just for me to grow my skills on air and in a creative sense of how do I get more comfortable on camera? How do I get good at this public speaking presentation thing? And then that kind of led into a bunch of other opportunities. But that was one of my favorite things I did at Penn. It was so much fun.
Can you talk a little bit about, because you mentioned it earlier, which is interesting, is something that I've really loved about the podcast I've been doing is I'm sure that you've seen it too, is the human interest side of athletes, right? Which obviously you and I've talked about this off air. It's just like really important to really understand who these players, who these athletes are, and because it provides relatability. Can you talk
Right.
about, why you felt like that is something that's been so impactful to you in your career, like being able to uncover those human interest stories outside of just, yeah, you scored 3 goals in the women's lacrosse game the other day, or like in women's soccer, like Maggie Robinson made 10 saves or something like that, right? Like, can you talk a bit about like who, like it's important to know who these people are and why that was so vital for you in your career?
Yeah. I mean, I think you hit it on the head. It is the relatability. It's really hard for people outside to be like, okay, cool, you have all these accolades. Like, why do I care? Like, how does this relate to me? And why should I give you my time to listen, to watch, to read about this? Um, and I think it's also really one dimensional to only look at the athlete and not look at the background that they're coming from, the mindset they've adopted, the challenges they've overcome. And I think it just really does a disservice to sports in general when we generalize like that. And I also think, like, selfishly, I would always think about how would I want to be portrayed, or what questions would I want to be asked if someone's doing this for me? And it was always like, sure, the accolades are great, but candidly, I was a bench warmer my entire career. Like, I didn't have the accolades in college. I was great in high school, and then it kind of just like it didn't work my way in college. And so I always was like, okay, but I'm way more than a player, and no one is seeing me for that. They're only seeing me for she's not playing. She has what, like two starts, three, you know? And so I think that experience kind of made me realize I personally have so much more to myself and I'm not one dimensional. I want to share that for other people because I know this is a shared experience.
That's great. And that's really important. I think a lot of times when you're playing or not playing, you get lost in, the athletic side of things and how much playing time you're getting. Did you always have that mindset of like, hey, like I'm gonna, try to be less one dimensional, or is that because of the experience of everything kind of fluctuating with injuries and playing time and COVID? Okay, I need
Yeah.
to diversify my skill set. Did that come more from the circumstances, or did you say I always had, stuff outside of sports growing up that allowed that?
I think it was a little bit of both. I think growing up, I went to a really good academic school my whole life, and my parents always really stressed like sports is only one side of this. Like this is great, and we really want you to pursue this while it's something that you enjoy. But also, there's so much more, and keep an eye on that because that's what's going to go in your like go your way long term. So I think I kind of had that in my mind always, and then as this happened in college, as I was like, oh, I'm going to be a bench player, I need to lean more into what can I bring to the team. If it's not playing, like it's going to be my positive attitude. It's going to be the mentorship that I can offer to younger players. And so I kind of had to shift into that role, which then made me realize, okay, I have a lot more to offer, not just playing wise, like that's just one side of it. So I think it was a little bit of both. And COVID definitely accelerated that of like, all right, now I'm really not playing. Like, let's figure this out.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit now? I want to shift over to the big project you put together, which is the Mixed Doubles podcast with Josh. And it's obviously, you got a couple episodes off the ground now, and it's cool that you're doing that. Obviously, and my first question with it is obviously you explain in your first episode what you're trying to do, but to
Mhm.
give like a 30-second to a minute, kind of synopsis of what the pod is and what you're trying to do. Can you explain like the idea behind it and then what ultimately you're trying to get out of it?
Totally. So, Mixed Doubles is a women's sports podcast created by myself and one of my coworkers. His name is Josh Smythe McCauley. He was a former football player at Columbia University, and as I said, I was a former soccer player at Penn. So we come at this with a really cool and like unique background. And our whole goal with this was to create a space for people to listen to women's sports news, like top stats, big players, but also what's going on in the world of women's sports business. What are the WNBA media rights deals? What's the NWSL doing? Let's talk about League One volleyball. It's just now getting off the ground, signing with ESPN. Like, let's provide a space where people can listen for like 20 to 30 minutes and really understand the women's sports landscape in general. Um, and how this kind of came to be is so Josh and I are coworkers. We both work at the NFL, and he was sitting behind me, and we just had this great banter back and forth. And always I would be like, someone needs to be videoing this. Like, this is too funny, the stuff we're talking about. And like the banter was so good. And I was like, I created a podcast in college called You Throw Like a Girl, where I interviewed very similarly a lot of women in um, the women's sports industry. I interviewed Lauren Rosen, who's the sideline reporter for the NBA, for the 76ers in the NBA.
Mhm.
I interviewed a New York Times bestselling author, Miran Fader, who's a sports journalist. And so I kind of parlayed that into this and said, okay, Josh, I have this really cool idea. You worked on a podcast in college. I worked on a podcast in college. We're both really passionate about women's sports. He's a huge ally, which is awesome. Let's come at this from a really unique perspective. And that's what we've done. And it's been really fun so far.
So talk a little bit about then for you, what this has meant seeing the success of women's sports. And obviously, it's not just Caitlin Clark, which obviously
Yeah.
she's done a lot of good. I mean, obviously that's the media numbers from not just her college numbers, but obviously their ESPN2 WNBA debut was pretty amazing. But
Right.
can you talk about also just like, for you, like kind of discovering like the successes within like the NWSL coming off their best year and even like women's collegiate volleyball, like those different things. Can you talk about like, for you as you're doing it, what stories have you uncovered that have really, opened up your mind to the success of women's sports and why it's been able to do so well recently?
Yeah. So I there's like two sides to this. One, it feels really fulfilling to be able to shed so much light on women's sports and have this come out at a time when women's sports feels like it's blowing up. Like this past month and a half, I mean, like after the college basketball championships, just feels like there's so much hype and energy around it, and we kind of came out at the right time. Um, but I do think it's really important also what we're doing to show people that like, yeah, it's not just the WNBA, it's not just Caitlin Clark, it's not just Angel Reese. There's so many people who have been here for like, mind you, like 20 plus years doing their thing, and the media just hasn't given them the attention. So I think finding those stories, talking about professional women's hockey, they've gone through several iterations of their league and are just now getting off the ground, and they're so good. And like we can talk about League One volleyball, like I said, is just now signing with ESPN to air 10 of their games on like broadcast TV on big ESPN. That's huge. So I think just hearing about these up and coming leagues, but also sharing with the listeners that women have been like balling out for so long and people just haven't been paying attention. Like this, it feels new, but it's really not new. The attention is new. And I think that's been cool to like tap into and just remind people like, no, guys, we've been here the whole time. You've just been turning a blind eye.
Yeah. Well, a lot of it too, from my understanding, is just, trying to get the media name out there. But the good news, I think, actually, is NIL's really helped, I think, women's sports a lot.
Totally.
Which I don't know if you've talked about that at all in your pod yet. It's just
Not yet.
um, I don't know if that's something you've uncovered too, because like think about like the women's success, not just in basketball, but volleyball specifically.
Right.
A lot of
I
NIL deals are, NIL's really big in women's sports. Like, do you think that has, at least from doing research, do you think that has a major contribution too to about like why women's sports has taken off at the collegiate ranks? Is that a lot of these players are now icons in like a Gen Z mind or a Gen Alpha mind, so they can be like, oh, I know who this is. Like, let's tune in. Do you think it's any of that?
I honestly really do. I think because it's making people more visible and it's marketing them on these social platforms where Gen Z is seeing all this content. So like if someone is getting shoe deals with Adidas and you're seeing an Instagram post about it, or even one of my college soccer friends is has an NIL deal with Brooks Running, then you're seeing that on social media and it's like building hype around it. And if you're a big player, that just only increases your brand. And I think what NIL has allowed is it has allowed individual players to become personal brands. So people like Angel Reese by like her personal brand that she's built. And that's incredible. Livy Dunn by the personal brand that she's built. Again, she's not the greatest LSU gymnast. She's not the best on the team, but she has this huge brand around her that she's been able to leverage. And that coinciding with like social media being huge right now and TikTok being really popular, I think all just kind of comes together to really push this onto everybody's feeds. And we're all on our phones so much. So, like, yeah, you're going to see these ads. It's going to be really visible to you. And then you're going to be like, oh, and they're competing next week. Let me tune in. So I do think NIL had a huge role in the visibility and branding.
Yeah. Well, shifting back maybe to the growth and structure of your pod,
Mhm.
for you, well, you're trying to compete in an industry that, is obviously very saturated because everyone has an opinion on something.
Right.
And so obviously podcasts, I've seen it even in the 4 years I've done it. It's tough to go viral and crack, the Gen Z realm without, becoming like a TikTok influencer, so to speak.
Yeah.
But can you talk a little bit about like, what you have tried to do from maybe a marketing standpoint, social media promotions, to be able to get mixed doubles to be something that people want to watch, listen to? I don't know if you stream it on YouTube. So I just saw it on
We
Spotify, but
have. Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about just kind of like, that realm and,
Yeah,
how you're
totally.
trying to grow it?
Yeah. So candidly, this podcast is only like 2 months old. So this is like very much in its infant stage. But I have a lot of really big ideas of where I want it to go. But we're currently on like all the podcasting platforms, even the super niche ones that like when you can submit it to Spotify, you're like, yeah, let's send it there. Like maybe we'll get one or two listeners off this website. So we're on all the big platforms, Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts. We also have been partnering with another coworker who does our graphics and like marketing for us, and he's incredibly skilled at it. So he works with a lot of these programs. I think it's like I don't even know what they're called. Like After Effects, I think is one, CapCut, and he makes us
Yep.
these like reels and graphics for our Instagram page. And it looks really professional because he did a lot of this in college. Um, and so I think that's kind of how we're trying to grow a social following is by making this relatable and engaging and also just like quick hits of like, okay, here's the top 5 things you need to know about of women's sports this week. Or here's a really fun audio bite of the podcast. It'll like prompt you to click the link and tune in. And then Josh and I have been, I think since we're both in at one of the biggest professional sports leagues like in the US, we've been really tapping into our networks and sharing this with them and posting on LinkedIn and posting on our personal Instagrams, trying to generate popularity and listenership. And then also next for us is going to start an interview series where we bring on a bunch of different guests and just try to grow our reach that way and also make it more engaging because it's like it's great to hear both of us talk, but let's bring in some other perspectives from women who've actually done the thing. So I think that's where we're at. And I'm really excited. I'm super passionate about it if it wasn't super clear. So I'm just really excited to see how it grows.
Final question for you is, why has sports media been so important to you? And, why have you decided that this was the career path you're looking to go down?
Yeah. Great question. I do think it comes down to it's the same passion I had when I was playing it and the same love for the sport that I've just been able to like parlay into sports media. Cause like I said, I was a common journalism major. I'm really into like writing and media. And to be able to like marry the two is like, okay, and these are my two things that I really care the most about. So by default, it's going to make me really engaged in my job. It's going to make me really engaged in my side projects like mixed doubles. Um, and I also think it just feels really cool to be able to still work in sports. It's something you grow up doing, and it's something that some people like phase out of as like, oh, I played when I was like 18. I played when I was in high school. But to be able to keep that energy and that love for sports is so big to me. And I think the reason I love it so much is that you can unite a whole group of people around a sport when they have no like personal involvement. And that's crazy to me. Like when you go to a game and the energy in the crowd is so insane, it's because so many people care about like 15 random people on a field. Where else are you going to get that like buy-in, you know? It's like a little, if you think about it, it's a little cultish of being like, okay, you care this much about 12 girls on a field. Like, what do you mean? But it's so cool to see just people come together around sports and having a role in that is something that really drives me.
Yeah, for sure. So, Maggie, thank you so much for taking time to come on the pod. Always good having conversations with you. Obviously, wish you the best of luck with mixed doubles going forward. Hope that can take off. And for everybody listening, it's another episode of Shreds Takes with my guest Maggie Robinson, former Penn soccer player and co-host of Mixed Doubles podcast now. And stay tuned for more episodes. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much.